Speaker. I rise today as we're at these final stages for Bill C-76. This is the Liberals' attempt to fix the attack on our democracy that came out of the last Parliament when the Harper government moved what they called the Fair Election Act, which was clearly the Unfair Elections Act, which tried to, in various ways, disenfranchise a number of Canadians, particularly Canadians that were low income, Indigenous people, young people, all people that one would suspect that Stephen Harper didn't think really supported him much. So rather than make policies that appealed to various groups, the Conservatives' approach was to write legislation in our Election Act to make it harder for them to vote. Quite cynical, quite nefarious. And we've been waiting a long time for this bill from the government. They actually introduced one almost 2 years ago that would have undone the Unfair Elections Act, and then did nothing with it for 18 months. Didn't move it, didn't debate it, didn't talk about it. Waited until we had this bill, which was much larger, C-76, which takes on more issues. Now, for those watching, I just asked my Conservative colleague if she joins with us in agreeing with the Chief Electoral Officer, with the Privacy Commissioner, with the Privacy and Ethics Committee of the House of Commons, and every expert that we had come before a committee that said one of the great flaws in C-76 as it's constituted right now is that it says virtually nothing about privacy. All the Liberals are requiring political parties to do is to have a privacy policy somewhere on their website. The policy doesn't have to do anything. The policy is not enforceable. It doesn't mean anything in terms of protecting our democratic values. They just somewhere have to have a policy. And yet, we have warnings from around the democratic world, from our European allies, from our American cousins saying, you gotta fix this because the attacks are coming, the disruptions, the disinformation, the misinformation, the fake news campaigns that we're seeing on social media are genuine threats to disrupting free and fair elections in their countries and obviously in ours as well. Now, the bill is flawed, to say the least. Hundreds of amendments at committee. We have 179 amendments, I believe, here from all parties, including the government side. So they took 3 years to get to this point and got it wrong on many levels. Now, it's unfair just to simply criticize legislation. We're always working to improve things, make them better, because this should be a thing that is nonpartisan. We all agree that elections are vital to the health of this country, and those elections must be free and they must be fair. Allow the parties to argue their points and let Canadians, in a free and fair way, make the decision as to who they wish to speak on their behalves. Yet, we know that on some of the most important aspects of our democracy, C-76 made half-hearted or no attempt whatsoever. We moved motions to include my friend Kennedy Stewart, the mayor-elect of Vancouver, his idea to reimburse parties according to how fair they are towards women and other underrepresented groups in Parliament, because we know the facts, they're undeniable. This Parliament is 26% women. The last one was 25%. The current trend, it's going to take 80 years until we have a gender equity Parliament, unless we do something about it. And we proposed to do something about it in amending this bill, and the Liberals said we don't want to talk about it, and voted against this idea before. The Prime Minister loves to talk about what a feminist he is, but doesn't like to do much about it. Things like this, things like pay equity, things that matter to women. This feminist across the way can't be bothered to raise his hand in effort. We also tried to include electoral reform changes. We all remember the famous and often repeated promise from this Prime Minister to make every single vote count, to make sure that 2015 was the last election under first past the post. We wanted to help the Prime Minister keep that promise. What a radical idea. Liberals didn't want to talk about that either. We also believed that we should talk about younger people voting. We have support from some Conservatives and some Liberals to just study the idea. Have Elections Canada look at what it would mean to our democracy if 17-year-olds voted. What would the effects be? What would the impacts be, positive and negative? So a future Parliament, not even this one, but a future Parliament could look at lowering the voting age. Liberals didn't want to talk about that either. We talked about Sunday voting, which all the evidence in all the democracies around the world, including subnational democracies here in Canada, provinces and municipalities. We know that if you allow for Sunday voting, if you have the vote on Sunday rather than Tuesday, which is an odd day to have a vote, it can raise voter participation by 6 or 7%, particularly for marginalized voters. We have all the research on this. What do the Liberals want to do? They want to study it more, which I've begun to learn is Liberal code for no. When you ask them to do something, they say, we should study that. We've come to learn over these past 3 years, study means no. It's just they can say it with a smile rather than just simply reject the idea. The lion's share of the work and the evidence that we heard was around this issue of privacy. Now let's understand what we've learned, and these are hard lessons over these last numbers of years. Our British cousins learned through the whole Brexit episode that Cambridge Analytica and a whole bunch of dark and dangerous companies were out there targeting, micro-targeting voters through the social media, through harvesting data out of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all these accounts that people use for their social interactions, but also their political and news interactions with the world. That there are companies that were able to break the code of Facebook, sneak around the walls at Instagram, and find out more about people than they ever wanted them to know. And not just about them, but also about their friends and connections, and then target them. Now, this is a dangerous problem because when you have this, the ability to spread the lie becomes so much more powerful. You no longer just use a scattergun approach to say my friend's a terrible person, or this policy is going to lead to that. You can hyper-target particular voters that you're looking to sway. And the British learned this the hard way. Ask the British Prime Minister how the whole Brexit thing is going for her. Ask the Irish how they're feeling about it, the Scots. And we know that that vote was not done fairly. And some participation of Canadian companies. So the Privacy and Ethics Commission in this place, made up of all parties in this place, said in their conclusion that political parties must fall under privacy rules to protect our free and fair vote. So in rejecting our amendments, Liberals on this committee rejected the analysis and the understanding of Liberals on another committee. Not just them, they also rejected the Chief Electoral Officer of Canada, who said, and said to us, if there is one area where this bill has failed, it's privacy. The Privacy Commissioner told us, C-76, this bill, contains nothing of substance when it comes to privacy. Open Media conducted a poll of Canadians and found out 72% of Canadians want political parties to have some sort of rules governing their management of data, their protection of the data which we gather. And let's all admit this, the other parties won't do it, but we will, so one day they'll join us here, that political parties are in the game of understanding voters. That has always been true. That's gone on to overdrive over the last 10 to 15, 20 years. With the advent of the internet and social media, the ability to gain information about voters, multiple points of data about each individual voter at the voter level, and then target those voters with specific messages can be a positive thing. If somebody is interested in the environment and pipelines and want to know why the Liberals spent $4.5 billion on a 65-year-old pipeline, a political party might want to know that so they can talk to them about what a dumb idea that was. Especially for a climate change fighting Prime Minister, that might be a good little bit of data to know. But we also know that parties are collecting this massive amount of data with no rules or oversight whatsoever. Now, look at the Europeans. The Justice Commissioner of the European Union, who are on the verge of having elections, said that we can no longer treat this as business as usual. The threats coming from foreign governments, foreign agents, and domestic folks that are looking to simply subvert our elections, to cast doubt on the democratic process, is real. The U.S. Justice Department, under Donald Trump of all people, has said this is information warfare, that there's an interference in the U.S. midterm elections going on right now that is connected back to Vladimir Putin. And all of these examples are coming forward to us from our own experts, from international experts, and the Liberals said, no, we don't care. We simply don't care. We're going to allow this bill to go through without any significant and meaningful changes to protect our democracy. Well, what's an election bill for if not that? I'm simply at a loss for words when I talk to my Liberal colleagues and say not one witness came to us and said, you should just leave the whole privacy thing alone. Everything's good. The status quo is fine. Every single witness, including our own Chief Electoral Officer, said it is imperative to act. And the Liberals shrugged. And here's the question, Speaker, and I'll leave it at this, that there are challenges and tensions that exist within each individual MP. Their loyalty and observation of what their party wants, and their loyalty to country. And this is a clear case where if you only were here to defend Canadian democracy and make sure our elections are free and fair, the choice would be clear. That we need to move the changes that the NDP are proposing here, suggested by our Chief Electoral Officer, our Privacy Commissioner, and every expert we talked to. And the Liberals consistently chose party over country. And that, Mr. Speaker, is unacceptable regardless of what Canadians feel like, regardless of what their voting intention is. C-76 has got to do better. We can fix it at the very last moment if people are willing to work together.
Questions and comments.